When you're fighting against yourself, how do you like to do it? Do you attack directly with substances or insults, or do you move around the side with little creeping, wounding comments and little remarks that slowly erode your self-esteem over time? Or maybe you're a master manipulator who weaves through your psychic defenses and you stab yourself directly where it hurts in the most vulnerable place that completely destroys your self-worth. Today we're exploring a dark and also, unfortunately, very normal question, which is how to deal with intrusive thoughts in the form of negative self-destruction. I've identified 3 different archetypal patterns that we're going to work through in this video. We've got the bully archetype, we've got the thief archetype, and the thief being that slow creeping remark. I'm calling it the thief because the thief steals your self-esteem over time. And we have the evil genius master manipulator who finds the exact point, the exact vulnerability, the exact shameful trigger, and hits you right where it hurts. We've got the bully, we've got the thief, and we've got the master manipulator. These are, for the sake of demonstration, the 3 types of archetypal shame-based inner critic based on a variety of childhood situations, which we're going to try and dismantle in this shadow work video. And it's a big task because we need to understand a bit of preamble before we go into the direct subpersonality work. And if you've never done anything like internal family systems therapy or also understand your subpersonalities, I recommend you get these 2 books yourself. You might mistake your inner critic and your own intrusive language for your actual identity, but they're not the same. Within internal family systems, there's this idea of parts, and the tragic mistake that we make is that when parts get a bit too close to our psychic center, we mistake the part for ourself. But this is actually the idea of a blended part, and what we need to do is unblend the part, in this case, the bully, the thief, or the mastermind, inner critic, evil genius, unblend them from our ego structure so we're no longer overtaken by the intrusive thought and we don't feel like it's something that we have to follow through on. Again, this is a complex question. I'm not going to be able to cover the entire traumatic origin of why these inner critics become so strong. If you want to do that, you're going to have to read a book like Embracing Your Inner Critic by Hal and Sidra Stone, or you can join me over in the Shadow Work Library, where I have an entire module on shame and self-criticism, where we're discussing things like apathy, depression, the desire to hurt ourselves, and practical ways and journaling exercises to move through those kinds of states. For the sake of this video, I'm going to try and keep it as actionable as possible by breaking down this idea of intrusive thoughts with a bit of a philosophical framing. Because when you're saying, I'm getting intrusive thoughts, where are they intruding from, and who are they intruding towards? Even within that framing, we know that the inner critic, no matter the form of the attack, is not our true self. It's intruding from somewhere within our psyche that we don't consider to be our core essence, which is useful because if you're feeling overwhelmed by the desire to jump from a building, or there's constant stabbing, shameful remarks that put your self-esteem down at every turn of your day, if you know that it's not really you, it's better, all things considered, to feel like you've got a demon inside of you that's attacking from the inside, but it's distinct enough from your psychic center, rather than the truly hopeless state, which is feeling like you are the demon itself. And again, full spectrum, full big picture healing over multiple months and years. You're not a demon, you're not possessed, you can be healthy, you can be stable, and it's also normal that everyone at some point in their life gets a variety of intrusive thoughts, and when they're negatively tinted, they can become very damaging and very shameful. But we also need to consider that an intrusive thought can be a positive intrusion. It's not just an intrusion from darkness, you can also have intrusions from the light, and we call these peak experiences. You might have a mystical revelation. Some people will feel like in meditation they get an experience of hearing their soul or their higher self. And if you think of something like affirmations, when you start practicing consciously the I am safe, I am happy, I am successful, I am creative, I am fulfilled, I am grateful kind of statements, you start making a conscious relationship with positive intrusions. And if you practice that for long enough, you eventually get to a point with your self-esteem where you start positively intruding on yourself. And if you've never experienced this, I can't wait for you to get there, because I'll have moments in my day-to-day life where I feel like a bit of a shameful shutdown is about to happen, and I maybe haven't done so well, I'm shooting a video, or I'm a bit slow in my work that day, or I'm feeling tired, I'm not performing at the gym, whatever the issue might be, and I get a positive intrusive thought that breaks me out of that present moment psychic state with something like an encouraging pat on the back of, you can do this, I'll get it next time. It's like a positive inner voice. But that inner voice is also very similar to the inner voice that ideally we all had during childhood, because if you want to get to the bottom of the intrusive thought issue, you need to understand, this is the fundamental point for the video, one idea that you can take away. Listen to this carefully. The critical, damaging, punitive, venomous, torturous energy of the inner critic is almost always directly related to the level of punishing, direct, damaging voices that we had around us during childhood. Said more simply, the strength of your inner critic is directly proportional to the strength of the outer criticisms that you were exposed to during early developmental years, but during the kind of age 4 to age 12 period in particular, which is when the ego really starts to create solid formations within your psyche. It's not a complete story. Yes, there are situations during adolescence and adult relationships where trauma happens and shame can creep in from new perspectives. But fundamentally, every client that I've worked with on inner critic issues, when we've done meditations, when we've gone into active imagination, and when we've really done the shadow work around their particular inner critic style, it leads them back to a moment of their mother or their father, sometimes an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent who had a very critical approach towards them, and they eventually internalize that language to keep themselves safe. You can read a book like Embracing Your Inner Critic if you really want to go into this in detail. And again, within my course, I cover this over multiple hours. So I'm trying to do as much as I can in a single video. But for the sake of simplicity, if you understand that the inner critic was never you to begin with, and the inner critic's voice, the inner critic's style, is usually mirroring the main parental style that you were exposed to, the connections start to land. I mentioned the 3 archetypes of the inner critic, or at least 3 archetypes that we can work with. There's definitely more of the direct bully who's punching you with insults, and this is the kind of inner intrusive thoughts of, you're worthless, you'll never do anything, and lots of swear words that I can't say on YouTube without this video being flagged. That direct energy is usually related to the direct energy of a mother or a father who did the exact same thing when punishing and scolding you, or maybe you had a parental figure that did more of the slow self-esteem, corrosive, poison drip style of punishment by hitting you down when you did the painting of, oh yeah, whatever. Maybe they ignored you, maybe they were dismissive, maybe they were passive-aggressive. That's where the sneaky thief pattern comes from. Or maybe you had a particularly malicious parent, in which case, I'm sorry you had this, and 5 years after a deeply shameful moment at school, or something bad that happened in your personal health, they bring up casually, almost as an offhand remark, while they're reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, and they go, oh yeah, remember that thing? Well, that's why you'll never do anything. That like, direct, straight to the pain point style, evil genius inner critic, it didn't come from nowhere. It's usually a parental pattern. And if you can step back and realize, okay, although the voices are loud in my head, and I'm not saying that you've gone insane, we all get this, we have thousands of thoughts per day, but if those intrusive voices, that intrusive language is so present, if you can create just a bit of spaciousness to realize, that's not me, and then this inner critic part over here, that's also someone else from my past, and I'm just replaying that, you gain the awareness that you're in a traumatic loop. You're cycling through the same wounding, and the reason that that's happening in most cases is that it's usually the best survival strategy for a wounded little boy or little girl to preemptively self-punish rather than being punished on the outside. I'll give you a few examples. Say, for example, you've got a parent who's in the direct bullying kind of inner critic response, and they directly insult you. It's better when you haven't done so well on the test from the better, right? Not actually better. None of this is healthy. Just to be clear, I don't think this is good, but it's better in terms of survival for that little boy or that little girl to apply that language to themselves before they go to the parent, because the parent's bigger, scarier, and is going to do it anyway. If you get a bad grade, or you didn't do well at the sports game, or maybe, I don't know, something happened, you did something naughty, you ate all the food that you shouldn't have eaten. If you go to your parent as a little boy or a little girl with excited energy, maybe a tiny bit of shame, and it's disproportionate shame to the shame that they want you to experience, they're going to come down even harder on you. If you go to your parent and say, I didn't do very well on the test and I know I'm stupid and I'll never live up to anything, the parent's going to think, oh yes, they understand what they are and I don't need to say it again. And the parent will say, yes, you're right, that's exactly how it is, and don't do it again. Versus you go up and say, I didn't do very well on the thing, and you didn't come in with that deep, shameful energy, they're going to let you know just how bad you actually are. It's an oversimplification. I'm trying to condense it in a few minutes, but that's the essence of the pattern. With the bullying example in particular, you need to internalize that so that the parent doesn't then layer it all onto you, which is far more painful. And if you're given 2 crappy sandwiches, you make yourself the smaller sandwich, feed it to yourself first, and the problem is you get trapped in that over time and you don't really know how to apply the loving voice, because surprise, surprise, if you were from a truly loving family and you had truly loving experiences throughout all of your childhood, again, I'm speaking for myself, I'm speaking for the clients that I work with, most people have one, sometimes 2, but at least one parent who had a particularly strong inner critic voice because of the nature of the way parenting was back when our parents were children. It then gets repeated and internalized, and this is where we have things like generational trauma and ancestral baggage. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough love. We didn't get enough actually compassionate, loving, supportive, healthy mother, healthy father energy, because if you did, you would then have positive, intrusive thoughts. And if you've ever seen videos on social media, I thought this one video just now hit my mind. I remember seeing a viral video of a 3-year-old girl in this massive winter jacket going down a ski slope, and the dad or the mom had put a microphone on her little pink jacket, and you could hear her talking to herself as she's going down the ski slope of like, I can do it, I'm really good, lean to the left, lean to the right, woohoo, I'm doing it. And she's self-congratulating as she's going down because her introjected positive intrusive voice based on the parent's example was one of love and one of support. If she had have had toxic or negative parents, it's very likely that the voice that she was repeating, literally she was saying it into the mic and you could hear when she was alone, would be, I'm scared, I can't do this, I don't want to do this, I'm going to go left, fall over, I give up. It's healthy parenting to the absolute core. Negative intrusion can be shifted towards positive intrusion, but a bit of philosophical framing about why that's happening is essential for actually healing the pattern. Shadow work is about going into unconscious territory, meeting unconscious entities, and working with unconscious behaviors. 3 different aspects of shadow work overall, and in this case we're working with the unconscious shadow entities of the inner critic and the unconscious symptomatic behaviors which they come up as the literal thing that you're saying. But you're working with the inner critic subpersonality. And once more, I recommend that you read a book like Subpersonalities by John Rowan, because the ultimate healing spectrum, if I want to lay that out for you right now, is that you need to unblend and realize that this bad or negative part of you is something which is distinct from your core self. Some people like to make it quite dramatic. They put their chips in the camp of higher self and the soul, and they start developing a bit of a love and light persona to balance out against a demonic persona. You can do that. Eventually, this starts to collapse. As this starts to collapse, they're both overinflated positions. Yes, you're inflating in 2 different directions, but you can do it in more of a middle way. Unfortunately, I've rarely seen someone who's got a very negative self-talk go straight into the balanced but tilted towards positive self-talk overnight. It usually takes years of trauma healing, and it also takes, I'm going to be honest with you, it also takes an everyday lifestyle which is actually loving. It doesn't matter what the intrusive thought is. No matter how extreme it is, if you know you're not going to do something which really damages you, and I can't say certain words, you saw me there, I wanted to say the word beginning with S when you're no longer around anymore. If you know you're not going to go there, but the thoughts are still in your head, you have the possibility of changing. And I know what that's like. I spent about 12 years in that state myself. You're there, but you're not there. You have the potential to change, but that change is anchored on an everyday lifestyle, which is actually positive. You can't be drinking and drugging and abusing and wasting your time in a dead-end career, wasting your time in toxic or damaging relationships, and expect that that old voice from the parental figures of the past is going to dissipate when there's plenty of examples around you of why that's true. And that's really confronting, because I don't want you to misunderstand or think that I'm calling you a loser or whatever your particular language pattern is. Probably a little bit more extreme than that at times. I'm just mirroring it back to you and saying that yes, you are indeed that, because look at your life that you've got right now and it's all hopeless. I'm not saying that, but I am trying to invite an awareness that there is a level of stoic detachment which is required if you know your life across the board in the many categories of your identity is not where it's meant to be and it's tilted towards negativity. You do need to do the work of many months of shifting it towards a positively holistic lifestyle so that you've got an even greater distinction between the old negative inner critic intrusive entities and voices and behaviors and your actual present day reality. You're stretching out the timeline in a way which is undeniable. It's very, very, very difficult on a day where you've made good money doing something you love, in a good relationship with someone you love, in a great body that you love, and in a positive mental relationship and spiritual relationship to God and other people and the creatures around you, when all of that's going on and you get some kind of attack of, you'll never live up to anything, I can't believe you'd even try, based on what your mom said or your dad said or continually said when you're 6, 7, 8 years old. You've got so much energy invested in your current identity, that healthy self-image, that this seems like a whisper. It's no longer shouting in your ear. It becomes smaller based on actual lived reality, because your actual lived reality in the past was the exact opposite. And that's the unfortunate reality that trauma healing forces us to confront. And you can do it over time, you can do it patiently, but I'm trying to condense it down into just a single YouTube video. Again, within my course, The Shadow Work Library, I explore these themes over multiple hours with multiple journaling exercises, and that's the structure of the entire course. We've got 9 intensive modules covering from A to Z, from all the way into trauma to all the way to the self-actualization and higher potential. For the sake of a single video, if you really want to heal your intrusive thoughts, you separate it out, and eventually, when you get to the point where it's no longer so toxic and hostile, you can start making peace. And that's where inner child work really begins, because if you pull off the mask of the inner critic, be it the bully, the thief, or the evil genius, you will almost always find a wounded inner child who at age 5 decided at a moment of pre-conflict, because they're smart enough to realize that if they go to mom or dad with this bad news, they put on the mask to mirror back to the parent that they get that they've been bad in the language that the parent presents the badness and reinforces that badness. All you need to do is remove that mask. That can't be done, I will not lie to you. That can't be done quickly. It requires a lot of work, and what's within your control is creating an everyday reality which has more opportunity for positive intrusions. You can take a spiritual approach, you can take a trauma healing approach, whatever works for you. Fundamentally, it takes a lot of time. I'm not going to lie to you, it took me over a decade to work through my own intrusive negative self-talk, and now I don't really experience that. I don't talk to myself in these directly hostile ways like I used to, and I have fundamentally high self-esteem, which maybe takes a situational hit based on lived reality rather than some narrative fantasy or some catastrophizing. And if any of these things are haunting you or troubling you on a daily basis, they can be shifted. You separate it out. You see the inner critic as something which is separate. Again, read the books that I recommended, and eventually you start applying love and compassion. But that's awful advice for someone who's in that really combative energy, or constantly being stabbed in the back by their own psychically repressed and unconscious parts. You have to work in a bit more of a combat energy. If someone's literally attacking you on the street, and this is where it becomes real, this is like, don't bypass this step. You're walking along the street, someone comes up to you with a knife in their hand. Ideally you run away, but let's imagine that you can't run away. It's a very dangerous, very scary situation. what do? You don't rip off a corner of your white t-shirt and start waving it in the air and saying, let's have a peace treaty, and expecting that you'll be able to sit down and write out a contract with hours of civil discussion. You're being met with evil, you're being met with violence, and you're being met with very destructive energy. And when destruction's coming in that way, you want to run away if you can, but when the thief or the killer or the evil part, the perceived evil part, is in your own psyche, you can't run anywhere on this earth and escape that. Which is why you need to meet it with a bit more aggressiveness at the start, create a bit more distance, a strong push, get off me, that's not me, that's my inner critic. You push them away, and then from that distance, a safe distance, you put something up like a force field or a bulletproof glass, and then you start having the diplomatic, active imaginations and meditation practices, and eventually you lower the boundaries because they dropped the weapons, they didn't need to hold on. It's an old story, an old baggage. They were given it by someone else. That work is possible. Depends where you are on the healing timeline. If you're at those early stages, create the distance. If you're in the middle stage of creating the dialogue, fantastic. Keep working in that space and active imagination. And if you're at that final stage, which is where I experience myself most of the time, you can start to see that your inner critic won't come up with a knife in the darkness. It might be a small comment here or there, or maybe like a bit of a passive-aggressive remark. And it's much easier to diffuse. It doesn't build up anymore. That's within your power. I hope this has been useful. And remember, once again, this is an episode within my shadow work series. You can watch the entirety of this series, including some high-quality videos directly from the course, by clicking the shadow work playlist over here. And if you're ready for true depth, come join me inside the library. We're talking about this in so much more detail. You can see it down in the comment section and the description.